Hi, I'm Seamless, and the crap failed miserably, which is why those in the archive of YouTube are seeing this now. And this is actually like good 30 minutes into the stream, and so you missed everything that happened up to now, which honestly wasn't a lot, so that's fine. I'm in the middle of writing a melody for this section. I'm trying to write what I wrote with the bass line that I did in the previous video. And I'm getting there, but it's not quite there yet, so I'm just trying to get that in there. And hopefully, yeah. Just edit the last 7 minutes or so. I might do that. I really hate video editing, but there's actually some stuff I can do on YouTube to kind of mess with that, so I'll see what I can do. That's kind of what I was supposed to do. Actually sounds a little better. That's about what it was. It's a you know, perfect version of what it was, but that's what it was. Man. Nice. Now let's try and get this beginning part to be something. Yeah, that doesn't quite work. No, triplets. Getting into that part is going to be a bit different, and I'm not 100% sure about what I'm doing here. I wasn't really ever sure about the beginning part. I really only knew that I was going to do that one part and like sort of this. might even be getting this rhythm part right, but we'll find out. Yeah, kinda. This whole thing might be very jarring coming out of this part. What does the chat say? Pitch bend the first G5. Some of that pitch bending might work out. A lot of this, it works like note wise, but like right up in here it suddenly comes like full swing, like literally full swing, and like nothing else is doing that up until that point, which makes it a little bit weird. So the pitch slide, I can just go wah like that. Or if I wanted to get real clever, I could lead into it from before. Just when I enabled audio from the left. That's not in here, is it? Is it in here? Allow resizing from left. There it is. Even more clever, I could do this. Now that swing thing I was talking about, I can kind of approximate by doing this. That was kind of cool. So I'm hearing doing like good ones of this thing, but it's hard to hear that in the actual track. And this is why I thought I had this part wrong, is because the conventional wisdom would say that I lead into this, but this is kind of like a grace note thing. See, that doesn't work, so. This one might just make sense going full on like that. I'm into that. What does the chat say? Fruity Balance is a volume controller, not a panning plugin. It does actually have panning capabilities, though. Freaking out at the giant reverb blast. I don't know what was. I mean, I have an idea what that reverb blast was, but like there's a lot of things that could be doing that. I don't know. Whatever. Yeah. I'm kind of okay with this being sort of like a little bit of a letdown. Like I guess you could call it a break. Like, because the drums are still there. I'm alright with that. And then I think it's because it is a break from. And then eventually it. I feel like I just wrote a 1960s superhero TV show theme. I feel like that's what I just did. And I think I'm okay with that. Gotta be careful. Them copyright protection algorithms are pretty good. What's the chat say? Synth should be more clear. I don't know what the heck people are talking about. When I blew into my soda bottle was the same key as the song. It's Providence. All right. I'm going to move on to the drop because there's some things I want to do. So, actually, the first thing I want to do is mess around with the sound a little bit. That wasn't what I wanted to do, but that sounds kind of sweet. For those of you who have stuck around for the entire series of making this song, should be quite familiar with the fact that I almost never liked how this sound sounded. And I was always changing it, and the last thing that I did to it was the one that stuck the longest, but I'm still gonna fuck with it. Sort of into that. Do I automate that ever? The answer to that question is yes. In that case, Alright, that's kind of stuff I have to do a full volume because the way that the mix sounds right now might not be representative of how it actually sounds, because that would be stupid otherwise. For those of you wondering why I just stood up and went to the wall there, that was me checking the sub. Because even though I don't have a subwoofer, actually this is true about any speakers. If you have, people seem to think that like you need to have a large diaphragm, like a larger than a large regular like 8-inch diaphragm speaker in order to make sub, and it is true that it's easier for larger cones to move more air with less power. However, any cone is capable of producing bass waveforms. It's just they're usually very weak, and if it's a weak waveform, you're generally not going to hear it unless you're far enough away that you're at an entire period termination away from the source. Meaning that if you're really right up in front of your speaker, the waveform didn't have time to terminate, you know, at your ears, and thus you're not getting the frequency. So stand up, go stand far away, and chances are you'll hear a lot of bass. So that was me checking to see how the bass felt. For those of you with subs, you probably agree with me that it feels kind of dope. What's the chat? EQ match your sub to a reference track. Yeah, I do that. And for the most part, that's, you know, that's just what I do. But I do still want to know what the sub feels like, because that's fun. It's a lot of fun. People not talking about stuff. That's fine. That's whatever. This dude, he's the puppy step guy. That's forever how he'll be known, no matter what else he does in life. So for the most part, I'm pretty okay with how this track sounds. There are some arrangement things that I want to fix. And was it the arrangement? Well, I want to make the ending a thing. That's real. I'm not going to actually make an outro. I'm just going to have it end and I don't give a shit. I'm so done with this track. I like it a lot, though. It's definitely become something that I could be great, that I can be happy with. Did I go 4 bars? 4 bars out? No, I went 2 bars out. Just to ruin DJ's days. I'm sure people who are actually good at being DJs will have no problem mixing this. Not that I think that it's really going to be a thing people do, but my stuff tends not to be very good for that purpose. Or, I mean, this, hey, I mean, if they have a track that's in G and then they have a track that's in F, this would actually be really good for transitioning. Very specific purpose. And the track ends. Goddamn. If I want to get real meta, I could actually hold the note, that new note, for no particular reason. Like, really? I'm into it. The other thing that I wanted to change is I'm just super not good at like mixing this slap bass in with the actual stuff. And honestly, I have never tried to do that before. Not only have I never tried to do that, but I've also never done it with a real bass guitar, by actual slapping. Most of the time, when people are using slap bass samples, they're usually samples. Like Contact has plenty of like bass libraries that have like completely perfect slap bassing in it, and so me doing it like this was basically just me handicapping myself. That might actually be the opposite of what handicapping means in this context, but you know what I mean. And then there's this guy at the end. See, this actually isn't a slap bass. This is me just doing regular fingerstyle bass, just hard enough that it sounds like it's a slap bass, because really the techniques are similar. That's why it got its own effects chain, because of the way that it's played creates different problems and different frequencies. And I attempted to play it off by having ridiculous effects on it and making it its own kind of just like a weird little thing, but it didn't really work. Oh my god, shut up. Damn. Okay, that was my timer. I'm not going to split up today's part. I'll just make it one whole big thing. Yeah. Mix-wise, I'm into it. I actually like the new this bass tone. Goddamn. That right there is the part that has that weird little sweepy bass. I love that so much. See, the problem with doing these tracks from scratch like this is that I should reference stuff like before I go live. I don't, and it usually only occurs for me to reference things while I'm doing it, and I cannot reference things while I'm doing it because then it'll record me playing someone else's song, and then I'll get hit with copyright on YouTube. So that's why I don't do that, but it does kind of handicap me because right now I think it sounds dope, but I have no idea what it sounds like in comparison to stuff that typically sounds like this. For the most part, though, I'm pretty, it's only going to be minute changes that have mostly to do with person-to-person stylistic involvements in their mixing practices, which means if I'm a little bit different than that, I don't particularly care. I know enough about how stuff sounds to know that what I'm doing is fine for my own personal sensibilities, and that anyone else who tells me that it's not fine, it's really just their opinion. Although that's always the case for the most, I mean, there is something to be said to, adhering to traditional standards, and then there's something to be said for fucking off with that, but, that's a conversation for a different day. All right, this is distributed to full note. You guys like my 60s superhero TV theme? The hat was really loud. Oh, I just now noticed. Okay, I believe that I'm gonna call this done because all the changes that I'm gonna make from here on out are mostly going to be because the point you get when the song is never really gonna be done, but that what you are doing is not really affecting the overall quality of it. That is the point of diminishing returns, and I believe I have reached that. So I'm gonna call it a day, and I'll play this through before the stream ends, so we can hear how it goes through. But let me explain to you what's going to happen with this song now. So in the past, the way that tracks from scratch have worked, if I actually finish them, which has only happened twice. The first one was Stream Dream, and that one ended up on my Momentum EP.
The next one was Funk Fight. That ended up on the Art of Silent EP. And this one, which I'm really trying not to call Funk Fight 2, but I am probably going to call it Funk Fight 2. I am probably going to release as a single. Not only am I going to release it as a single, I am also going to have a deluxe version. The deluxe version is going to include this project. Now, here's the problem with that. There are a lot of samples in here that are not mine. Not only that, but there's Superior Drummer. But I think as far as third-party plugins go, Superior Drummer and Valhalla and the Valhalla plugins, I used Room and Shimmer, I think, are the only plugins I'm using in here that are not in FL, like by default. For the most part, that should mean that I could just put up the FLP and people can probably use the project. Things like Superior Drummer, though, are going to be a bit of a complication. The way that I'm going to do it is I am just going to have the bare naked FLP up in there for people who do have all the stuff. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make an FL only version which stems out all the things that, actually you're not going to have. So I'll stem out all the Superior Drummer stuff. I'll stem out these samples. I am going to be doing stuff to these samples in particular so that you do not have access to the actual source samples because would be illegal for me to sell them like that. Regardless. So even if the regular ones, because for example, there's processing going on these kicks before they even go into the effects chain. But what I'm probably going to do is bounce them out post-effect and then put them in the bus so that they are legally a new sample at that point. Just so that I'm not breaking laws and pissing off Isotope. Alternatively, I think I might actually get permission from them to do that. That could be interesting. But for the most part, that's not going to be a thing. Have I just not used Valhalla on anything? That'd be clever. Oh, I did use Guitar Rig 5 in particular for the bass stems. So the slap bass. Look how small Guitar Rig is on my monitor. That's hilarious. So that means I'll stem out the slap bass post Guitar Rig 2. I'll basically freeze the stuff that uses third-party things for the FL version. What that's going to mean, though, is that there's going to be it's going to be kind of a large download because it's going to have a lot of WAV files and a lot of stuff like that. Not only will I be doing that, but the deluxe version will also include the option to have just the straight-up stems. I did not use Valhalla at all in this project. I'm going to stem this out for people who are not FL users and stuff like that. So people who will at least have access to the stuff in here. So it's gonna cost some money though, because this is a very a pretty valuable project in terms of the stuff that's in there. And I am absolutely all done with people ripping my shit off and trying to upload it to Beatport. However, on the day that this comes out, I will have also released the song as a single, which means that it's gonna get put into the systems to detect that kind of shit. So just letting you know. What else is fun? Let's go look at the time spent on this project, because I'm curious. 20 hours. That's about how long Funk Fight the first took. I'm probably gonna call this Funk Fight 2. I really don't want to, but I'm gonna. I might call it Jazz Fight. It's a little bit more jazzy than it is funk, if you think about it. Like, these are definitely very jazz chords. Reminds me of every anime ever made. Anyway, so yeah, I've outlined how that's gonna work out. Let's see what the chat says about that. Someone doesn't like Mexicans. So start the hardstyle on Wednesday. Yeah, that's the plan, to start the hardstyle tomorrow. Now that I've completed this track, I gotta do some research on hardstyle. I have a lot of tracks and artists collated from my various polls that I've been researching I've done, so I have a lot of fun content to do in terms of listening to hardstyle. I'm very interested to see how this particular project is going to turn out in terms of selling the deluxe version. It is kind of a throwback to my original business enterprise, which was selling the projects for, pay what you want. But that was when I was smaller, and that was when this stuff honestly wasn't anywhere near as complicated or difficult as what I'm doing now. So that's why shit's more expensive. It's going to be fun, though, to process this whole thing and trying to stem it out in a way that makes sense. But all the important stuff, like the actual effect chains, all the FL stuff I usually mixed up because that's what I use to make all the stuff. That'll all still be here, so that'll be fun. Anyway, I'm playing through the project. Through the project. I'm into that ending. I'm into that ending. Good lord. If y'all were wondering what I was doing to make it follow the cursor like that, I was holding down Shift and 0 the entire time. And it kind of freaked out a few times, which is a little frightening because that's kind of how I record playthroughs. And I need that to work. Anyway. Future Base is pretty old school. Is what I'm doing Future Base? I don't know what Future Base is. Or Future House. People keep telling me to do future genres. I don't know what the hell any of them are. Not only that, but nobody has ever been able to adequately describe to me what they are. Every time. Anyway. My new bass guitar is pretty future. Yeah, that's pretty goddamn future. So I guess we're done. If you have any questions about this, please let me know. And don't forget to comment, favorite, and subscribe, and share, and all that good social media stuff that helps me out a lot. Because that's stuff that I need to have happen in order for my business to continue being a business. There'll be announcements, and there'll be like an entire video about this project being for sale, and all the details will come out as time comes on. As time comes on, because time's off. I don't know. Anyway, I wonder if anyone could read this on regular 1080p. There we go. Anyway, Future Base sounds like something by Square Pusher. Square Pusher is pretty great. I do like Square Pusher. Cool. So, if you have any questions about this, let me know. And as usual, have an XSplit day.